Hey, I'm Pastor Rhonda.
And I'm Pastor Seth.
You're listening to Growing Hope,
Living Faith. Well, welcome back to Growing Hope, Living Faith podcast. We are so glad that you guys are listening in. This episode is going to be out a little bit later in the week, but that's all right. We're at least getting one in, so be thankful for that. But there's just been a lot going on in life, and one of those things is you are finishing up your credits, your chaplaincy credits, and you're not too far off from having all of that done and completed. To have that certification to be able to be a chaplain. So congratulations, Pastor Rhonda. How do you feel having that almost in the rearview mirror?
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's just the first unit in the state of Georgia. You have to have completed the first unit of clinical pastoral education to be able to be hired as a chaplain. So this is the first unit that I'm completing, and there's several more. If I want to continue to go down that road, I can move on into unit 2 and 3 and 4 and maybe become board certified at some point. I don't think I'm going to get that far.
Right.
But it has been time consuming and has been probably the most formative, shaping thing I've ever done. And I've finished school. I've gone through ordination training. I have been through Trevecca, and all of that education has been great. But this is totally different. It has been one of learning to find your pastoral authority and learning how to really listen. You know, in pastoral ministry in the church, you do a lot of talking, you do a lot of teaching, but this role is very supportive. And I don't like to use the word life-changing a lot because I think it gets thrown around, but I will say that this has been extremely transformative, and I am thankful for how God has shaped me and the times where I have been a pastor to complete strangers. You know, it's one thing for a pastor to have a congregation and love on them because they love you back.
Right. Yeah.
But in a hospital setting, these are complete strangers that you probably will never see again. And to go in and love them where they are, and really on the worst day of their lives, oftentimes, it's just a different kind of ministry. And it's not one where you get a lot of glory, where you get your picture taken. And, you know, I had a very significant, probably the most significant thing I've ever done in ministry. And it felt like I was on such holy ground. And it wrecked me. It honestly wrecked me. But there were no pictures. It wasn't appropriate, you know. There's no bragging about it, you know, and telling people what happened. But I know in my heart that Jesus was there in that ring. And I got to be a part of what he was doing already. And that's such holy work. I'm so excited about it. I do think that it will form my writing. It will form who I am as a pastor, just in deep ways that you just can't get through ministry training. You can't get it through the books. You just have to get out there. And for me, I promise I'll quit talking.
No, it's great. Keep going. Such good stuff.
But you know, I've always been a staff pastor. I've not had the opportunity to be a lead pastor. And so every single scenario that I have been able to provide pastoral care, it's always been in the shadow of another pastor. And in this you know, kind of work, I am the pastor and I have to make decisions on my feet, you know, and there is no lead pastor that I can lean into their shadow and let them take over, you know, when I get insecure or not sure of what I'm doing. I mean, I'm there at the hospital by myself. I'm it. I am the chaplain that's there. And so, you know, I'm learning how to accept that and roll with it. And it has been deeply transformative.
Good. Yeah. When you're in those moments, I imagine it's so hard to to really realize and to truly see. Sometimes we don't see it till we get to the other side, but God's grace is consistent. Always brings me back to
Yes.
that Paul, where he is really seeking God to really, to take something away. But, where he says, where obviously the response is my grace is sufficient for all your needs. And it's like, yeah, like that's, when you get to experience that on such a deep level, it's such a powerful thing.
Right.
Like you said, you don't like to say life changing, but it really is, because when you get to those places where it's just so beyond you, that's my favorite place to be in ministry. But it is the scariest place to be in ministry on such a deep level.
Right.
But it's so important. And I think as we push there as pastors, then hopefully we can push our people to that place to kind of live on that edge once again, to where
Right.
it's so easy to live in the safety and comfort of our lives. But there is something to pushing ourselves out there, getting out of our comfort zones. That if we really, really want to understand who God is and meet God in different places, well, that's where God is at. He's in the
Exactly.
uncomfortable. He's in the messy. He's in the harshness of life,
Yes.
and you will totally experience a totally different God when you step into those things,
Mm.
as opposed to sitting back in in our comfort, in our easiness of life. And so, man, those are great words that you shared, and I'm so thankful that you got to experience that, because I know
Yeah.
it's going to help you further in whatever ministry, in whatever direction God has for you. And I know it builds up your faith, that that you can step out now on the
Mm.
realities of whatever you feel called to, whatever you feel like God calling you to. Yeah, it may be something scary, it may be something that is uncomfortable, but these experiences are being built, or they're building you up so that you can step out, because you
Mm.
do know and you have experienced that reality that His grace really is sufficient in all of our needs that we have. And so, man, I'm so glad you've had that experience. And
Yes.
man, my hope and prayer is for anyone who's listening is that you will push yourself out of your comfort zone, really go to some of those really, really hard places. And I'm here to tell you, you will meet God like you've never
Right.
met God before.
Exactly. And the phrase that keeps coming to mind is embody the gospel.
Oh,
I
so
have
good.
heard that and I've kind of known in my head what that meant, but I feel like I have embodied the gospel
Yeah.
this summer. And that has been so exciting. And then another topic that is so close to my heart, and I know it's close to your heart, is this whole idea of equality,
Yeah.
how God has created all human beings in His image, and how everyone is worthy of love and dignity and respect. And we see that in the hospital like you don't see it anywhere else. And
Mm.
just a quick story, I had a code blue situation with a white male patient,
Mm.
and it's funny because it's not funny, but there's just been a lot of talk in the news about women, and I think there was a pastor that said that women, they're like who people pass through. I think that's how he
Right.
put it. But in this Copalu situation, it was a doctor. She was female, and I'm not sure where she's from. Some mid eastern nationality.
Right.
Very strong accent, beautiful lady. But man, she commanded that room, and I literally saw her bring the dead back to life.
Yeah.
This man had no heartbeat. He had no breath in his lungs, and she commanded that room. And it's just so cool to see, because you know what, to that white male, he didn't care. He
Yeah.
didn't
At
care
that
who
moment, for
was
sure.
working on him. And I see so much of equality, and I just see Jesus all through the hospital. And it's just been like, I could go on, but
Oh
it
yeah.
has been so cool. But that was just another thing that I witnessed this past week, was just, seeing, what if this doctor had, what if she wasn't living into her calling and what God has gifted her hands to
Mm.
do, and her knowledge, just because somebody thinks that she's only supposed to be having babies, So that's a whole topic for a whole different day. But it
Yes.
was just it was really cool to see her living out this talent that God has placed in her and the ability to learn, medicine and practice it. And it was just beautiful to, because I was the one consoling the spouse, and she handled it like a boss. I mean, and again, I'm thankful that God did it. God, but
Yeah,
He
yeah.
also works through hands and through doctors and nurses and
Mhm.
medical staff. And so I could go on and on and on talking about the things that I have learned and things that I have seen that I've only heard about. I've
Mm.
only heard statistics, but I've seen these things. I've seen these people with these conditions with my own eyes. And it has been very transformative. So let's move on. I could go on and on and on because I'm very thankful for the
Yeah.
opportunity. So
Well, you're
let's
passionate
turn
about it
my
too,
mic
which is
off.
great. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
passion. I love it. And
turn my mic off.
well, but the reality is what we're talking about today, even in the lectionary passages, it's so important for us to try to somehow wrap our brains around how do we connect to God, right? Like that's a huge thing of scripture. And I think that's what a lot of scripture is once again, who is this God? Like this God that we serve, the God of gods, who is this God? But then how do we connect to him? How do we form relationship? How do we have relationship with him? And I think, a lot of the lectionary passages really kind of point to this one idea this week. And it's, if we're not careful, it's easy for us to sometimes read the readings of Jesus and think that he came away to do with the very things that we're going to be talking about today. But I don't think that that's the reality of what Jesus came to do. Because we're talking about this idea today is the idea of Sabbath, and how do we make sure that we, well, first off, what does Jesus do on Sabbath? Because he did a lot of things on Sabbath. But why is Sabbath so important? Why was it important to, the Israelites? And why should it be important to us? Because it's so easy for us, and especially in the day and age that we live in, there's such a fast paced rat race of life that we live in. To not take a Sabbath or to not kind of take a moments of rest at least. And I think Sabbath should be very, very important to all of us. And like I said, I think that this passage, points to, even though Jesus does things on the Sabbath, but I think there's a lot of underlying things that hopefully we can kind of dive into a little bit when it comes to Sabbath.
Sounds good. Well, we're looking at Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things being done by him.
Oh, yeah. This is a really cool passage on
Yeah,
such a
it
deep
is.
level. I think
It's a cool story.
Yeah, it really is. I think if we're going to understand it, it's very important that we understand why Sabbath was important. Because, like I said, I think it's easy to look at, the leaders in the synagogue and to be like, overly critical of them. The more and more I've kind of journeyed and come to just some places of understanding, I've really have become less and less critical of the Pharisees. I used to be very, very critical on such a deep level of the Pharisees, but I've really become less and less critical, I think, of the Pharisees.
I see myself.
Yeah, absolutely, on such a deep level. But we got to understand Sabbath. Sabbath was essentially set up, in the first, really in the 10 Commandments, right? That God essentially gives to Moses. Hey, when I was created, I rested on the seventh day. Therefore, I want you to take a Sabbath day, where essentially you don't do any work, you don't do anything, and you truly take that moment of rest. And really, Sabbath, if you go back to the original Hebrew, essentially it just means stop, like stop, just stop. So, like I said, it's so easy for us, I think, to get caught up in the rat race of life. And I think God knows, obviously, how we're wired, how we're created. He created us. And so he know that obviously we would need those moments where we take a moment and just stop and breathe. But what you're stopping for is not I can't do anything. Oh, I can't. It's when we stop, we remember who our identity truly is. It's not in our day-to-day work. It's not in us making money. It's not in our other relationships that we have, but it's an opportunity for us to kind of have that identity check and to remember whose we are and why we are. And so that's why Sabbath is such an important reality in the Old Testament. Sabbath wasn't just meant to be for human beings, though. It was also meant to be for the land. And so in Leviticus, they set it up to where, in the seventh year, the land was supposed to lay fallow. So you plant and harvest for 6 years. On that seventh year, you don't plant and harvest anything. You trust that God's going to provide in those first 6 years. So when you get to that last year, that the land's going to be able to lay fallow. Then there was every 7 years, the 49th year, and then even into the 50th year, it was known as the year of Jubilee. And essentially on the year of Jubilee, everything went back to the way that it originally was. So like if you had sold a piece of your land or gone into slavery because somebody had something you needed and you offered them your land so that you could get what you needed for your family or whatever. All of that, all debts were to be restored and done away with. And if you had your land that your family owned was to go back to your family, and it really was this square one moment, essentially. And, unfortunately, these things never happened. There's no records of the seventh year, the land laying fallow, the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. There's no recollection. And so, but for the Pharisees, this was very, very important. And it became very much a do and don't list for them for Sabbath. Because once again, this is a commandment that God gives us. And we, as good Pharisees, we obey the commands that God gives us. And as long as we can purify ourselves enough and have enough purity in our system, then eventually Messiah will come and God will be here. And so it was a very, very big deal for the Pharisees is, hey, we don't lift a hand, we don't work, we don't do any of those things because this is the thing that this is how we be pure. And so it's important that we understand that those kind of two tracks, because that's the reality of the situation that Jesus is stepping into.
Right. And then we have to remember, though, this is almost common sense. It's like, yes, we want to keep the Sabbath, we want to keep the rules, but common sense, like he says, you would feed your animals, you wouldn't, you would lead it away to take it to water. And why would you not help a human being? It's like they just took it to the extreme that they forgot to be merciful. And mercy, again, as we keep seeing every week, it comes up somehow, some way about loving people. That is the greater good, and so many times God has said, and we've talked about it in, Jeremiah and Isaiah and all these other passages in the prophets where it talks about how you keep these rules, but yet, what I want you to do is to be humble and to be merciful, And so here again, it's like there's no rule that's ever going to trump mercy. And so that's what Jesus, and I think in those times when we are practicing the Sabbath rest in our own lives, that's where real ministry is kind of I think is born out of. It's in those times that we are spending in with Jesus, that we are breaking away from our normal activities and our jobs and our social media, and we're spending time with him. And I think natural ministry flows out of that. But again, I think this whole picture is like Jesus is saying, why would you not be merciful to this woman? And I keep trying to think about this woman. For 18 years she had been over, and if you look at the message, it talks about how she was twisted and had arthritis, and who knows if this, at what point. It seems like she was an adult and Satan did this to her, is what it kind of sounds like when it says that that she was bent over and unable, that a spirit had crippled her, and it was the spirit had bound her, and I guess we could get into the ins and outs of all of that. But the bottom line is, this woman for 18 years, and I keep thinking that's longer than like what we go to school for, or at least they're high school, kindergarten through. That would be your whole elementary, middle school, and high school plus years. And this whole time she has been bent over. And when you're bent over, you see nothing but the floor. You see nothing but people's feet. You don't see, how long had it been since this woman had looked into the eyes of another human being?
Yeah.
And that's just, and back in those days, it was hard to be a woman anyway, but can you imagine doing your household chores of trying to cook and trying to, I don't know if she was married, I don't know, but I do know, I can't imagine how awful those 18 years were. And he saw her, and when she came in, he saw her. And I think that is so beautiful that when Jesus saw her, he called her over, and immediately, it wasn't any faith that she had to muster up. She didn't ask him. He noticed that she needed mercy, and he sprung into action, knowing that it was on the Sabbath, because again, mercy's more important. But he saw her need, and without her even asking or praying, man, immediately she was straightened, and she's jumping up and down and she's praising the Lord. I can imagine the first thing she sees when she straightens up is she sees human face, his eyes, his countenance. I just think it's beautiful. But that's my 2 cents. Is that is mercy's always going to triumph anything else.
It's so good. This is almost, I think, an indictment against the church on such a deep level. Because obviously she's been begging for 18 years, right? She's crippled. I imagine she was probably around the synagogue a lot. Obviously she was around the synagogue this day that Jesus was there. Especially on a day like the Sabbath. Once again, just think about the bondage, and the bondage, the pain, the hurt, the lack of, safety, right? Like you said, for a woman in that day, it just, if you were a widow alone, then, you often had these struggles. I imagine there probably wasn't maybe a husband, because, if you have a crippled wife, it was so easy to be able to divorce back in the day. You just had to, provide a certificate. So any sense of safety or comfort or anything that she might have is essentially gone. And here we are on a day of the Sabbath, right? A day that brings us to remembering what this is really all about. It brings us back to our identity in God, and how God created us, and what God created us for was to be a blessing to others. And so here we are on Sabbath, right? And there's this bondage, and there's this debt like that this lady has. It's just all around her. And I just love the words that Jesus says to her. Essentially, he says, "Woman, you are set free." Man. Oh.
And she didn't do anything
no,
to deserve it.
No. But he said, you are set free. Like, this is Jubilee language here. Like, this is the reality of what Jubilee is all of those debts, all of that bondage, all of that stuff that essentially had come on people. Jubilee is the year that all, like, people are set free. It's this release from this bondage. It's this release. And this is, I think, a foresight of the reality of the cross. And what the cross is really going to be about is that, yeah, we have all of this bondage. We have all of this stuff, but we serve a Jesus who, when he sees the bondage that we're in, he sees the pain, he sees the hurt, he sees the suffering, he looks at us and he says, you are free. You don't have to be bound by those things anymore. And to me, this is an indictment on the church, because if the church would have been doing what the church is supposed to be doing, does it mean that this lady would not have been crippled? No, but she would have been taken care of. Like, she would have had food. She would have had people that would have been there to be able to help her, to be able to journey with her. There would have been people that maybe would have been able to help with medical expenses, so she could have gone to doctors, to be able to see people that would see the doctors that maybe she needed to see. And once again, I know that's a lot of inference. That's a lot of, like, maybe looking into this a little bit more, but the reality is that the church wasn't probably doing what the church should have been doing and taking care of this woman, and because the church wasn't doing it, Jesus steps in and he says, hey, I'm going to do what the kingdom is all about, and you are free. And immediately all of the bondage is ripped away from her. It's gone. All the bondage, all the 18 years of suffering, of living as a slave to this crippling disease, man, it is all gone in an instant, because Jesus says, hey, you are free. And this is a picture of the kingdom of God and the good news of Jesus Christ, and what it is all about is Jesus came and he died on a cross so that not just I could be free, but that the whole world could experience this jubilee, this freeing of the reality from bondage. And man, what an awesome reality that Jesus, in his ministry, as he's talking about, like I said, there's all kinds of things. There's all kind of warnings and signs and all of that he's talking about around here. Obviously the whole thing about division he talked about. Like, he's talking about this different way of living, this kingdom way, which the kingdom way leads to freedom. It leads to freedom from oppression. And it's so cool that in the midst of all of, those passages, we have a passage like this where Jesus, he doesn't just say, hey, this is what the reality is. He actually begins to show us, hey, this is what the kingdom is. This is what Jubilee is. This is what Sabbath really is, because this is what Sabbath is really about. It's about setting people free. And he does it instead of getting bogged down in the reality of, it's got to be this and it's got to be this and it can't do this and you can't do this and you got to do this. No, like, Sabbath was made for man. Sabbath is about freedom. It's about being freed from oppression, freed from our debts. And it's about us being able to connect to that which frees us on such a deep level. And I know I talked a whole lot, but I don't know.
No, that's good. I'm just thinking the word liberation. I mean, it just keeps coming to mind, just to be liberated, and I think sometimes people, some people, they like the checklist and they like to check the things off and think, well, I'm doing this, this, and this, and this. I'm good to go. And without thinking with your heart, without looking at the whole picture, it's not like a rule of thumb, but I mean, at the same time, I think Jesus is saying, use your brain. This doesn't even make sense. You're checking off this list, and then this person is right here. Of course, I'm going to free her. Liberation, that should change your priorities of everything that's on that checklist.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is this is the other reality of Sabbath, is it helps us remember that we're not in control. Like, we're not in control. And that's why we like our list, because it allows us to be in control. If I have a list, if I can say, yes, this is what the faith is about, and as long as I do this, and as long as I do this, and I can put this list on myself, but then not just put it on myself, but if I can put it up to other people and measure other people by my list that I think is right, well, then I get to be in control. And Sabbath is here to remind us that we are not in control. That's why God commands us to stop, to remember that we're not in control. And so we're not a part of this rat race, that we serve a God who is in control. I put quotation marks because I think we've got to be very careful sometimes how we utilize and how we say those things. But we serve a God who, yes, he is God and he can do whatever he wants to do. And we don't get a say one way or another. Whatever God does, whatever God desires, I think God is going to get, because he's God and we're not. But it's that remembering that, man, we are not in control. He is in control. Let's get back into our identity to remember that he is in control. And then we live the rest of the 6 days of our life as though we aren't in control, but that God's in control.
Right.
And when we live that way, when we're connected, and we realize that we're not in control, then that should affect the other 6 days and how we go about living our lives. We no longer make business decisions that, oh man, this if I make this decision, it means I'm going to make a lot of money, but it's not really a great ethical decision for me to make. Well, that decision becomes a whole lot more clear and a whole lot more easier to make when we realize, hey, I'm not in control. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And we become different business people, and we become different parents, and we become different children, and we become different whatever role, we become different pastors, we become different whatever, because if we take that day, not that it's, you got to do this on Sabbath and you can't do this, not that it's that, but when we take the moments and the times to actually stop in our life, we remember that he's in control, we remember that he owns all things, and we remember that just as much as he has freed us from our debts, our call is then to go and to share that freedom with the world and to be a part of the process of bringing others to him so that their debts can be free and they don't have to live with the baggage and the bondage anymore. And that's the reality of Sabbath. And if we could just somehow grasp and continue to just chew on this on such a deep level and get to those moments where we truly, truly stop, we just stop everything, we just stop. And I think our faith would probably be a whole lot deeper and broader. And I think the world would be much better off because we chose to do those things.
Yes. And for those of you listening in, I wish that you could see Pastor Seth. I see him on FaceTime, and he is so passionate about this. He's using his hands, and he's talking with his hands, and he's closing his eyes, and he's shaking his head. I wish you could see him. He's speaking to us from his heart, and I hope you guys have heard it today, because he is, and we are both passionate about this and about setting people free. And it's not about being rebellious of the rules, but it's about setting people free and not being a slave to the rules. And I think that's what Jesus is modeling here. Yes, he's not trying to be rebellious of the law.
Right.
He fulfilled the law. And, again, you always have to look at it through the lens of what is the most merciful thing I can do. Is it checking off a box, or is it lending a hand? And every time we see in Scripture, he's going to say, lend the hand. And that's what we have to do. But I wish you could see him. Who's just really preaching over here.
I do get animated. One quick story, and we'll wrap this up. When I lived in Sladen, Tennessee with my wife, we had just been married, and we were going to a church, Aaron Church of the Nazarene. And we were going to a Good Friday service, and it didn't start till late because they wanted it to be dark. Kind of how they did it is the candles went out, so they wanted it to be dark outside, so it was dark inside. And we were literally, driving, and we were running a little bit late already, but we were driving to a Good Friday service to celebrate, the reality of the crucifixion or the passion of Christ. And as we were driving, we drove past two people walking on the side of the road, and we kept driving, and I was like, we got about a half mile up the road, and I looked at my wife and I said, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're going to celebrate the reality of, the passion and the cross and what it's done for me. But man, there's two people who are in need right now, and we just drove past them. And I was like, I don't think that Jesus would be very pleased with us going to celebrate this thing, but seeing our neighbors in need and not being willing to help out. And she's like, you're right. And so we turned around. Well, she didn't say you're right. We were both on the same page having this conversation, so it wasn't like a me versus her or whatever. We turned around and we went and picked them up, and then we drove them. Then we finally made it to the Good Friday service. But I think that's just the reality of this, that as we grow closer and closer we begin to really see the things that are the most important. And like you said, it'll drive us to places of mercy and grace and compassion and empathy and all of those things that they're very, very tough things to do and to live in. And I don't say that story to puff ourselves up, but it's so easy to get caught up even in good things, in this the rat race of life, into the speed of life, and to not be willing to look around and to actually see, oh man, these people need some help, and I believe and I want to live the kingdom of God, which calls me to have empathy for people that I think are struggling, who are in a place of help. Well, I pray and hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. I do get very animated about this stuff, and so I probably have hit the microphone a couple of times with my hands. You may have heard some thuds, but no, it's been a lot of fun. Hope it's been as good for you as it has been for us having this conversation. If you have comments, questions, concerns, we'd love to hear from you. We do have a Gmail. It's growinghopelivingfaith@gmail.com.
And we have a Facebook page, Growing Hope Living Faith Podcast. We would love to hear from you.
That's right. Prayer requests, comments, questions, concerns. Just like I said, we would love to hear from you. Well, thanks so much for listening in. We pray and hope that you have a great rest of your week and a great Sunday. Know that we're praying for you. We love you. Grace and peace. God bless. Bye-bye.